Hello all and welcome to my channel, and today would be the first Malay lesson, and we will learn how to read Malay based on the formal pronunciation, or in Malay we call it as the Sebutan Baku. Alright, before we begin, as you may or may not know, Malay is written using the usual or typical English alphabet A, B, C, and unlike English, the way you pronounce or read words in Malay is fairly consistent. It's phonetically consistent. So yeah, without further ado, let's begin. So first up, we have the vowels. Here are the vowels. They are A, I, U, E, N, O, and we go through one by one. So this letter A has the pronunciation A, as in English. It is in the English word arm. So this arm, this word arm, has the sound A in it, and in Malay you see this word is anak, meaning child. By the way, the words and the brackets shows you the meaning in all of these slides. All right. Next up is the letter I. This letter has the pronunciation E. So, for example, in English, the word ink. So, E, ink, ink. In Malay, you see one of the examples, isi, meaning content. Next up is the letter U. It has the pronunciation U, it has an U sound. For example, in English, the word tu, so U. In Malay, it is the word buku, which means book. Alright, next up we have the letter E. And the letter E is a bit special here because it has two pronunciations. For example, you have this sound and or a sound. So, for example, the for the sound in English you have, for example, the word fur. So fur, in Malay, you can see as an example the word emak. Um, Next up, for the or sound, for example, is the word ferry. For example, in English, the word ferry has an sound for ferry, airy. So yeah, and also, not surprising enough, is in Malay we have this word ferry as well. So it's pronounced ferry, ferry. Okay. Uh, but here lies the difficulty in actually reading or pronouncing the letter E, because in Malay, in a typical Malay text, you would usually write this with just E, the letter E, without any mark to show whether it's or at. So throughout this course, I would differentiate the two pronunciations by using the letter E without an accent for the sound and for the sound I will use the letter E with an accent. So you can see this is without the mark, and this is the letter E with the mark right on the top. And last but not least, we have the letter O, and this is straightforwardly just pronounced as O, as in the English word okay, and example in Malay is also the word okay. Right, okay, and now this is what we're trying to solve, the enigma of like how do you tell whether it's or a. Basically, it all relates to this thing where I call it vowel harmony, and this applies to all Malay derived words. So basically, it doesn't apply to loan words from English or Arabic. It applies to all Malay words like that's originally Malay. There are three rules in how you can tell whether it's pronounced or a. The first rule, it says if e is paired with I or U, it has an sound. Second rule, if e is paired with an O, it has an a sound. And third, if it's if the letter E is paired with the letter A, it can either be or a, depending on the word's meaning. So whether how you if you pronounce it it can mean something totally different when you pronounce it as a. All right, let's look at the example for the first rule. Here we have all of the words paired with the words where E is paired with an I or with a U. So let's read them out loud. So this is sedih, This is letih, and this is jernih. Meanwhile, these are sejuk, perlu, bentuk, and this one is telur. So you can see whenever E is paired with an I or U, it has an sound. So it's se, le, jer, se, and this per, and then it's ben, so and this is tel. So yeah, you can see this is like, no, I mean it has the sound in all of them. This one relates to the second rule. So you can see is always E in paired with an O, you get an sound. For example, esok, ekor, and kore. So yeah, it has an sound. And this one is for the third rule, which if it's paired with an a, it can either be or depending on the word's meaning. So yeah, for example, this is enak, this is aneka, mereka, tempat. This one is cepat. This is semak, and this is semak, and this is perang and perang. Look at the different meaning for these two words. If in a typical Malay text, you would usually write semak without any like mark, but the way you pronounce it, this one is pronounced semak. It will mean bushes, as in the bushes you find in a thick forest. And this one means, when you say semak, this one means to check or to examine. So it has a totally different meaning. And look at these two words. This one is perang and perang. So perang with an sound, it would mean war, and this one, if it's this one is perang, it means the color blonde or tan or hazel. So if you go to a shop and say you want the color like blonde or tan, and then you say, oh, saya mahu perang instead of perang, that would mean you want war instead of you want blonde. So yeah, so yeah, that's always a funny like thing to think about. So yeah, just be careful when you pronounce the e. Yeah, that's always catches people out. Right, and this one. What about loan words? Because like the rules just now only apply to Malay sounding words. What about other loan words? Like let's take English for example. So for if the letter E will have the pronunciation that closely matches the original pronunciation of that original language that the low word comes from. For example, let's see, this is pronounced electric. It doesn't have a totally like exact pronunciation as English, but it tries to fairly mimic it. So for example, this is the for example for the English word electric. In Malay, you say electric, and this one it's petrol. And in Malay, you also pronounce petrol. And you don't pronounce it as petrol, you pronounce petrol. So it's a different sounding E. And for this one, this is pronounced train. And in English, it's also pronounced train. So it's kind of similar. I mean, not exactly the same, but yeah, almost. And this one is pronounced ticket, ticket. And in English, it's pronounced ticket. Well, that I mean, it has kind of, it has an sound. Well, here's the thing. I mean, some people pronounce it as ticket as well, but then again, it tries to mimic this uh, English um, word. So but in Malay it's pronounced ticket. Right, and this one is pronounced Esther. So also in English it's also called Esther, and last but not least, kelas, and in English it's class. All right. So the E sound tries to be almost, or at least this one is a bit faulty, but you can tell that it has some sort of the same almost similar sound to it. So it's not really a solid rule for this, but then again, I mean, it's more or less of a rule of thumb basically than a solid like guideline whatsoever. Right, we're done with the vowels, and now we're moving on to consonants. So just to make sure, it's good news if you're thinking about, the cons is going to be pronounced differently as well. No, they are pronounced exactly the same. Actually, all consonants are pronounced exactly the same as you would pronounce in English, except with a few exceptions for these certain letters or digraph. So there aren't many. There are just like a few of them. So and basically digraph. By the way, digraph means like when you combine two letters to form a new sound. Right. So let's start with the first one. The letter C has the sound ch, as in the English word chair. So it's the ch in chair, chair, chair. All right. And you can see the examples in Malay. For instance, this is cawan and this is cinta. Again, the words in the bracket gives you the meaning. Like I gave you guys the meaning of this word in these brackets, like over here. Um, so you can read them up. Next up is the letter K. Well, usually K in Malay, K is pronounced with a k, like all the time, um, except when it's at the end of a word or at the end of a syllable. Okay, so if it's at the end of a word or a syllable, it would have the thing here what we call the glottal stop. For example, in English, you would say something like "uh-oh." So this word is "uh-oh." The sound is what you call a glottal stop. So for the letter K, if it's at the end of word, typically you would not pronounce the k sound. You would just let it like stop glottally. So for example, in Malay, this is the word tidak. Notice how I didn't say tidak, I said tidak. So that's the right way of saying it. And this is atuk. So okay, this is atuk. Next up is the letter when you combine K and H together, it would have the sound, which is the h sound, as in the English word. Well, not really English, but it's kind of in English you can tell that this is would be pronounced han. So the h sound is in there. Example in Malay, for example, this word khamis, and this one is khayalan. All right. And next we have this letter. Uh, it's N and Y together to make the sound of nya. And when you put vowels, it can either become nya, ni, nyu, nye, nye, and nyo. So yeah, nya, ni, nyu, nye, nye, nyo. Right. So in English, the closest nya sound is like when you say onion, onion, nya, the onion, yen. And also when you say lasagna, lasagna, nya is the nya is in that. So it's kind of hard to say it for like usually like native English speakers because this nya sound doesn't appear quite often. Actually, it's quite rare in English, but in Malay it appears very very frequently. Examples you can see this is the word nyanyi nyanyi, and this is nyanyu nyanyu. So try have a couple of practice with these like pronunciation. So it's nya ni nyu nye nye nyo, and yeah, hope you get used to how to pronounce it. All right. Next, this is with this n. When you put an n and g together, it will make this sound, the ng sound. In English, you can say like for example the word singer, singer, and bang. So bang. In Malay, it's you can say here it's read as nganga, and this is hidung. Next one. So this when you put an S and Y together, it will make a sh sound, like the word sheep in English. So it has this sh sound. Example Malay is shurga, shurga, and this is ashi, ashi. And this one is when you have K and L together, it would become cl, as in the English word clinic. So, for example, in Malay, you have also the word clinic, and it's instead of using a C, you would use a K. So it's this clinic. So clinic. And this one is sorry, I can't move. Yeah, you can see that is KR, and that would have a kr sound. So, for example, in English, the kr sound would appear in the word democracy, democracy. And in Malay, we also have the word for democracy, which is a loaner from English, which is democracy, democracy. So it's a kra sound. So it's not really, yeah, it's basically like the difference that when you write with a C, we tend to write with a K for a k sounding, uh, you know, um, sound. Mm, and that's about it for reading the consonant. And now we're moving on to some practice sentences. This is the one I basically just randomly type up. I'm not sure if it's well. You can find a better like sentence practice somewhere else. So, how you would try to read like Malay text using the formal pronunciation. This is actually the pronunciation that every student in Malaysia were taught in Malaysian schools. Is the Baku pronunciation. So, but we don't usually read it this way. But even I find it quite awkward for me to say it like using the very very formal pronunciation. We usually have a casual way of saying it. But anyway, here I'll try to do as best as I can, and there might be some flaws, but I'll try. But it's probably straightforward, and you can tell um, how easy it is. So yeah, let's start. So here we go. Hai, nama saya Ahmad. Umur saya 20 tahun. Saya berasal dari Kuala Lumpur. Hobi saya menyanyi dan membaca komik. Setiap Khamis saya akan bermain bola sepak bersama rakan-rakan. Esok saya akan ke kelas untuk belajar bahasa Inggeris. So that's more or less how it would sound. Notice how like this one it's sepak and not sepak. Sepak means to kick and sepak means to like literally slap someone in the face. So yeah, so this is ball and this is kick. So these two words combine to make the word football. Yeah, to mean football. And this is the word we saw just now. This is esok, which means tomorrow. And down here is the translation. I think you can just pause and read it, like what it actually means. Um, so that's about it. That's the end of this lesson. Next lesson we will try. I will try to show you how to read Malay, but instead of using the very formal pronunciation, we just go on the normal pronunciation, or we call it sebutan biasa. So biasa is just normal. And we look at how basically this is how a native Malay speaker would typically pronounce things, or how he or she would read something of a Malay text, and also, but that's not always the case, that we do sometimes go back to this sebutan baku. So I'll try to like explain when we use sebutan baku and sebutan biasa. But in the meantime, if you're trying to learn Malay, just try to just go on with the sebutan baku, because it's much more simplistic. It's much more how would you say the formula of how you pronounce is more rigid, and it's just less hassle, I guess, if you have to, because basically, if you try to speak like Malay, first just try to use the sebutan baku, I guess, because even when you use sebutan baku, we as Malay native speaker would understand what you're saying. So I guess that's about it. And I would like to say thank you and meet you guys again, or in Malay you would say terima kasih dan jumpa lagi.